It's Reija, and welcome to my spring wrap-up, where I'll be talking about the books I read in the months of April and May. So I picked up 12 books for these 2 months, and 9 of those books were library books, 1 I DNF'd, and the rest I managed to read. And I'll just be talking a little bit of each book and give you my thoughts. At the end of the video, I'll show you some stats. Now, let's just get started. First book I read in the month of April was Caravel. I did a full review of that book, and I think my review states everything I have to say about Caravel. I did not enjoy it at all, and I gave it 1 star on Goodreads. Next up I read Crooked Kingdom for the BookTube SFF Awards, and I made a joint review of Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom, which is also on my channel. I'm kind of in the middle about the whole series. Like, I can see that it has a lot of merit, and I gave it a yay on my review, but I have to say that that book series is not necessarily for me. Even though I can see its merits and I can see all the good that it does, I don't necessarily want to own it or reread it even. I gave it 3 stars on Goodreads. Next up I read Saga Volume 6. I gave it 4 stars. It was okay. I think the story started picking up. Like, I thought that Volume 5 was a bit of fillery, but that Volume 6 really managed to actually do some character development and dive a little deeper in the story. And I actually can't wait to read Volume 7, which I have coming up next. Hopefully my library will have it in stock in a month or so. Next up I read Animal Farm by George Orwell, and what can I say, this was a reread. I had previously read it in Finnish, and this was the first time I read it in English, and I did gain a lot more insight into the book by reading it in its original language, and I did give it 5 stars on Goodreads. And the last book I read in April was The Color of Magic by Terry Pratchett. This marks the start of my Discworld marathon. I am planning on reading every single Discworld book in the coming year or 2. Depends on how much Pratchett I can cram in to a single year. And I really like The Color of Magic. I mentioned it in my Dewey's 24-hour readathon wrap-up that I really liked it, and I gave it 4 stars on Goodreads. So yeah, those were all the books I read in April. And now moving on to the books that I read in May. A lot of the books I read in May were graphic novels because I got into a bit of a reading slump, or rather I got into a bit of a book hangover, which I'll explain in a minute. And starting up with Descender Volume 2, I really enjoyed it. It wasn't as good for me as Descender Volume 1 was, which was a 5-star read for me. This one scraped along with 4 stars. I really enjoyed it, but I did feel that it wasn't as engaging, and I felt that there was a lot of build-up and setup for the plot, but not so much for the characters. So that's why I gave it 4 stars. And next up I read the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin, and I love this book. I gave it 5 stars. It was pretty much perfection. I loved how it straddles the fine line between sci-fi and fantasy, and I actually, when I finished it, I was so peeved that I didn't have anyone to talk to about it, because I really wanted to have someone to have a discussion about the book, and if I could have, I would have just pressed the book against my partner's forehead and tried to force him to absorb everything by osmosis, but unfortunately that doesn't work. It was a really enjoyable book, and I love it to death. And straight after the 5th season I read Liftgate, which is the sequel, also by N.K. Jemisin. I also really liked it, but I did not enjoy it as much as the 5th season. I feel like the 5th season had so much build-up, like so much world building, character development. Like, it was such a full-fleshed novel that Liftgate really would have struggled to stay at the same level, and for me it didn't. I gave it 4 stars on Goodreads, but I felt that the pacing was a little off, and the story became much more intimate, and we kind of had these windows into the characters' lives, and nothing earth-shattering no pun intended, really happened until the last half of the book. So pacing wise, it was a little bit of a departure from the 5th season. But I still really enjoyed it, and I actually bought both of these books after I had finished reading them. I borrowed them from the library, and afterwards, because I really liked them and I would really enjoy rereading them and lending them out to my friends, I bought them. After Liftgate, I read The Boxers and the Saints duology, which is a graphic novel series by Jean Lung Yang, and I quite liked it. I gave Boxers 3 stars and Saints 4 stars on Goodreads, and I felt that I really enjoyed the premise of the story. It is set during the Boxer Rebellion of China in the 19th century, and I really enjoyed the story, but I felt that the characters left me wanting. I would have preferred to have more fleshed out characters with more ambiguity to their morality and stuff like that, because now it felt that, especially in the case of Boxers, the main character came across as kind of selfish, and he wasn't fully fleshed out, and he was kind of paper thin. Like, all I got from him was that he was a nationalist, and that's it. Like, there wasn't really much to him. I would like to have seen a little bit more of an internal struggle with him. I think Saints did a much better job with its main character, because Saints tells the other side of the conflict. And I think Saints did a much better job with the internal conflict, and I started liking Boxers more after I read Saints, but I still would have preferred that they both could stand on their own merits. Now Boxers kind of has to lean on Saints for support. And last book I read in the months of April and May was Descender Volume 3, and this was also a 4-star read for me. And I said previously that Descender Volume 2 was heavy on the setup and the kind of lining up the puzzle pieces for the plot to move forward, whereas Descender Volume 3 really dealt with the characters and was really heavy with character development and looking at the past of all these characters and what made them the people they are in the current timeline, which I really enjoyed. I'm the type of reader that really likes character development. Like, I put a lot more emphasis on character development than world building. Even though good world building is always a plus, I tend to prefer well fleshed out characters. Like, I can forgive a lot about poor world building, but I can't forgive poorly written characters, if that makes sense. So for me it was a really delightful read, Descender Volume 3 that is, and I actually preferred it to Descender Volume 2, whereas my partner, who is also reading the series, said that he did not prefer Descender Volume 3 to Volume 2, and said that it was slow and dealt too much with the characters, which there's always different perspectives to the same reading experience. But yeah, I really enjoyed Descender Volume 3, and I can't wait to see where the series goes next. Though I have to say, if Descender Volume 2 and 3 were put together as one volume, I think it would have worked a lot better, because now you have one volume which is all about furthering the story, and then the story kind of grinds to a halt, because then you have the next volume doing nothing but building out the characters. So there's a pacing issue if you read them back to back. So yeah, that's something you should take into account when you read these graphic novels. So those were all the books I read during the months of April and May, and now let's go over some stats. So as I said, I DNF'd one book. I gave 1-star reviews to 9% of all the books I read, so one book. 0 books received 2-star reviews. 18% of the books I read received 3-star reviews. 54.5% of the books I read received 4-star reviews. And 18% received 5-star reviews. So all in all, this was another good reading spring for me, because I didn't read much books that I did not enjoy, which is always great. But I still said that I had a book hangover, and that's why I had to read more graphic novels to kind of get out of it, and that is because of the fifth season. Like, I'm torn about fifth season. Like, I loved it so much, and I'm still not over it, and I can't wait for the third installment in that series. It is quickly becoming one of my favorite fantasy series, and I really wish I had someone to just gush about it, because, yeah, that book was marvelous. So now we've come to the end. I've talked about all the books I read, and if you like this video, consider giving the thumbs up, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And leave a comment telling what books you read in April and May, and all the recommendations you want to give me. I'm always up for new fantasy and sci-fi. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye!